Right. So I've been covering immigration for 20 years, and even in the last couple of years, have been basically at every portion of that pipeline. And it is a pipeline. It's almost an unbroken conga line of people coming north, and these are not the same kinds of people that you saw a decade ago, who were mostly coming for work, mostly from Latin America, especially from northern Latin America and Mexico and Central America. We're seeing increasing numbers of what they used to call exotics because they were so strange, but they're not so strange anymore. And so I've traveled the length and breadth of that pipeline trying to get a more granular look at not just who's coming, but why they're coming. What are their motivations? And who is the smuggler? This is the big question that I think we don't really, a lot of people don't understand, is that they hear about the smugglers that are bringing these people up, and they imagine these shadowy cartel figures or the tatted gangbangers with the face tats and stuff. And there are some of those. But what we find is that a vast majority of the smugglers are the governments themselves, including our own government. As I've reported on immigration, not just in Latin America or even in the Western Hemisphere, but around the world, one of the things that you see is that immigrants are virtually always used as weapons. They're weaponized in one way or one form or fashion. In this case, the amazing thing about this flow, the overrun that Todd is talking about in his book, is that what we'll find is that the migrants are being weaponized by our own government against our own citizens. And this is a very strange kind of dynamic that affects everything about how they get here and why. So I want to show, for those of you that are not familiar with the Darien Gap, I want to give you some visuals to kind of have in your head while we talk about this, talk about the difficulty and the danger of coming through the Darien Gap. And while you see there on the map, this is the border between Colombia and Panama. It is about the most extreme topography on planet Earth. Bugs the size of your hat, house plants the size of houses. This is there's a swamp the size of Delaware in there. That's one of the reasons why you will never see a road through that area. It's also a very good barrier to slow down the drugs coming from South America, and even to slow down diseases like hoof and mouth disease. There's a long running program right along the Darien Gap that's paid for by the U.S. government that continues to this day, where they fly airplanes over the Darien Gap every week and drop screwworms they drop a bug that kills the screwworms that carry the hoof and mouth disease. And so it's an important ecosystem down there, and that ecosystem is being destroyed by what we're seeing with just record numbers of migrants. When I started covering the Darien Gap in about 2014, they were seeing annual numbers that equal monthly numbers now. And that's never happened before. This has only happened during the Biden administration. So now we're seeing last year 250,000 people coming through the Darien Gap from 150 different countries. And so let's take a look at this video that I have that shows this is the most recent trip I made down there just a couple weeks ago. And one of the interesting things that we see happening, the shift in the kinds of people that you see coming through there now. Not long after sunup, on the steamy Panamanian side of the Darien Gap, dugout canoes make their way downriver to a tiny Indian village. The dugouts aren't carrying locals, however. They're packed with migrants from all over the world whose destination is the U.S. southern border. Recent policy changes by the Biden administration allow 120,000 migrants per month to skip this challenging trek by pre-registering using a new mobile app. Even so,
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas maintains the goal is not to stop migrants from entering the U.S.
What we're trying to do is, and more broadly, incentivize a safe and orderly way and cut out the smuggling organizations. And I've seen the criticism of it as a ban, but it is not a ban at all.
Since the new policy only covers Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, migrants from other countries now fill these routes.
The migrants that are coming into Puerto Limon here are the lucky ones. They're the ones that had a little more money and were able to take the shorter route through the jungle that only took 3 or 4 days instead of 6 days or more. These tend to be more from places outside the Western Hemisphere, places like China, Afghanistan, India, places like that. We're going to go down and talk to some right now.
Many Chinese people said they decided to come now because of their country's harsh zero COVID policy.
Somalia?
Mauritania.
Mauritania. Wow.
Yes.
Somalia?
Among those arriving at Puerto Limon this day included 2 American journalists, Ben Berquam and Oscar Ramirez. They'd just followed the migrant trail all the way from Colombia, walking 3.5 days through the jungle.
As we're heading out, we see the same group stuck here, waiting to figure out what to do. Ask them what happened to their guide.
It was way harder than what I thought that it was going to be. On the first day, it was really hard. We got a little bit lost right there in the second day, so we had a backtrack that was double the effort. And on the third day, we were exhausted. A lot of the people were dehydrated. We saw a lot of migrants dehydrated, so it was really bad.
He's not exaggerating. Yet Colombian smugglers are using videos like these to advertise in China, making the trek seem like a fun and easy hike in the woods. Chinese pay smugglers up to $20,000 per person, although the true cost is measured in misery.
It is completely destroying the environment. It is risking their lives. It is risking child's lives. It's human torture, what they're doing, and they're abusing people. That is the most shocking thing for me, that they put a human being through that, and they're promoting that. It's really false advertisement, what they're doing.
Second Lieutenant Vicente Guerra and his team of Senafront Border Police regularly recover bodies of those who die of heat stroke or drown during river crossings.
The dangers these migrants face are enormous because they have no experience surviving in the jungle. Others bring children through this. It's a whole different level of risk they are taking. We carry everything we need in case we have to spend the night in the jungle. These people have nothing.
On this trip, the Senafront team accompanied Ben and Oscar on their journey, making careful notes and keeping an eye out for bandits known to prey on migrants. After experiencing it for themselves, the journalists had a clear message.
People should look for another routes for people to migrate, or a safe way or a safe pathway for people to go through another place if they want to migrate. But the Darien, no.
Don't come. Don't put your kids through this. Don't put yourself through this. Don't be raped. Don't be robbed. Don't be murdered by the cartels.
From Panama, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
So I think I want to go back to the quote from Alejandro Mayorkas there. What he said, he did not say we are trying to stop people from coming. We're trying to discourage people from coming. He said we are trying to incentivize people to come. Now, Alejandro Mayorkas visited Panama after we started to report that the route the people were taking through there was taking him 6.5 days. And by talking to the migrants themselves when they came out of the jungle, asking them, how many people did you go in with and how many people did you come out with? We determined that between 1 in 7 and 1 in 10 of people who went into the jungle never came out again. Now, many of those people don't show up on any database. They don't even have passports. Many of them are stateless persons, or if they did have a passport, they got it robbed or they threw it away. They very often get rid of them on purpose. And so there's no record of them in there. And so the true numbers of people who have died in the jungle in that trackless wilderness is impossible to even calculate. But again, just the best way we could do it was saying, how big was your group when you went in and how big was your group when you came out? We even went to the Colombian side and looked at groups and met people as they went in, and then came around and found them on the Panamanian side when they came out and measured the people they were missing. And what we found is that between 10% and even a little more than that of the people who go in there did not come out again, to the point where the Indian villages that they first come to after walking 6 days through the jungle. These are very small Indian villages deep in the Darien that don't have running water. Don't have electricity or like a well. They got their water from the river. But they could no longer drink the water out of the river because of all the dead bodies that were in the river upstream. And so they were having to bring bottled water into a place that gets 12 to 15 feet of rain a year in order to drink, so that their people could survive, because they couldn't drink the water out of the river like they've done for 500 years or more. So the changes that we're seeing is that, and you might ask, like, well, why would people from Afghanistan and Syria and China come through the Darien Gap? Why don't they just fly to Mexico? Well, they come to the Western Hemisphere to the only place where they can get in, and that's typically Ecuador, because Ecuador will let anybody in without a visa. Sometimes some countries, they can go to Brazil and start there, but then they have to take buses up to the Darien, walk through the Darien. Once they get through the Darien Gap, though, the governments become the smugglers, because the government of Panama doesn't want 250,000 people in their country that they have to care for. And so they put them on a bus and drive them to the Costa Rican border. And at the Costa Rican border, they walk across, they get picked up by the authorities there, and they get put on a bus and taken to the Nicaraguan border, so on and so forth, all the way. It's a hot potato, like you said, all the way to the U.S. southern border. And they know this. So when it came out that you could get into the United States easier if you were a pregnant woman or if you had a child with you, we saw an explosion in the number of pregnant women and children walking through that jungle. And I'm talking about, like, I just met a woman the other day that walked through there with a 1-month-old baby, if you can imagine that. And so many of those babies would get washed away when they were trying to cross a river, because there's no bridge. They had to swim across these big rivers, and they just get washed downstream. They'd lose them. They had, in 1 year, I think the year before last, they had 39 children so young that they couldn't tell you where they were from, or even maybe tell you their name, come out of the jungle without their parents, because the parents died of exposure or drowning or whatever in the jungle. And the children would come wandering out of the jungle with no parents. And Panama doesn't know what to do with them. They don't know where they're from. There's no way to even determine what country they're from. And so they would, and they don't have a system for that in Panama. So they would put them in a hospital or put them in a hotel or something, and try to figure out what, they put an ad in the paper looking for family members or anybody that knew who they were. And when nobody came forward, then they would just give them a Panamanian name and put them in school. And so there's a lot of Juans and Marias that are actually from, like, Congo or someplace now, that are now growing up in Panama as orphans. And Panama typically doesn't have an orphanage system. So there was no system to deal with that. So they had to create a whole new section of Centerfront to deal with that. What we're seeing now is a tremendous number of Chinese people coming through. And that doesn't diminish the number of Cubans and Venezuelans and Haitians that are coming through. Up until just recently, that was the biggest numbers of people coming. Those people now can come directly to the United States with the help of that CBP-1 app if they have a sponsor in the U.S. But that has not diminished the numbers of them coming through the Darien Gap so much. And when you talk to them and you say, the U.S. government says you have to go through this CBP-1 app, and they say, yeah, we tried, the website was down, or they say it's full, they've already reached their quota. Remember, that's 120,000 people a month that the Biden administration is escorting into the United States. And they're already claiming, as we said they would, that we have reduced the numbers of illegal crossers by 120,000 a month. No, they haven't. They've just pre-legalized them. It's like TSA pre-check for those people coming through, and it just allows them in. And then they, as the government very often does, they just change the metrics. They change how they measure. They don't change the numbers. They just change how they measure the numbers. And so The people that we're seeing coming through the gap now are saying, well, I'm from Haiti, but they don't know that, and I don't have a passport, so I'm just going to tell them I'm from the Dominican Republic, and therefore I'm not subject to that 30,000 a month quota coming through the CBP One app. But as I showed there, we've seen a tremendous jump in the number of Chinese people that are coming, and they're coming for the same reasons everyone else is coming. Now, keep in mind, how many countries do they have to cross through to get to the United States border? It's over a dozen. And any of those countries, they could build a life. In fact, the majority of Haitians and Cubans that you see coming through the Darien Gap now on their way to the United States are not coming from Haiti or Cuba. They have for years been in places like Peru and Chile, making a living, making a life. They're well dressed, they're well fed, they have iPhones, they've been making money. But they're coming to the United States now after being 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years in making a life in another country, specifically because the gate is open. And so this is what you see. There's a direct correlation between the messaging of the administration here in the United States and the number of people coming through. There's a direct correlation in the types and demographics of the people coming through based on the policies of the United States, those pull factors. Okay, so the push factors that everybody talks about in the media is war and oppression. They're fleeing war and oppression. Well, yeah, Haiti's a really bad place to live. You don't want to live in Haiti. But the people that are coming to the United States that are Haitian are not coming from Haiti. They've been living in the Dominican Republic for many years. They've been living in Chile or Peru for many years. And they're coming right now because people are handing out cookies in the United States. I'm going to tell you a quick story about a Cuban couple to illustrate that point. There was a Cuban couple I met coming right out of the Darien Gap. Their feet were in such bad shape from trench foot that they couldn't walk by the time they got out of there. And I literally treated them, me and my sons, gave them first aid when they got out because the skin was sloughing off their feet. And they just had raw, bloody feet when they came out. They were a couple, a married couple that had both been school teachers in Cuba, and their combined salary in Cuba was $45 a month. They decided to come to the United States, and so then I gave them my phone number, and I said, I'm trying to track the route that you take to get to the U.S. southern border. So every time you move, would you do me a favor and just text me where you are? Text me your location. And they did. And they showed me the route they took all the way to the United States. It took them about 3 weeks or a month maybe. And I happened to be visiting my family in Dallas when they made it to El Paso. And they texted me and they said, we made it. We're in the United States. And I said, wow, that's great. I said, if you make it through Dallas, I'm here for a few days. I'd love to, buy you a cup of coffee or something. So I was able to meet them in Dallas. And they said, hey, could you do us a favor? We need a ride over to this church in Fort Worth. And I said, okay, I'm going that way. So I gave them a ride over to the church. I guess that makes me a smuggler. They were already in the U.S., So one of my things, I'm never going to help people get to the United States. Once they're there, I guess it doesn't matter so much. But I was very interested to see why they wanted to go to this church. Well, there was a program administered by the state of Texas, and that through this church was administered through the church, where they could sign up and get a stipend for 2 years to kind of help them get their feet under them now that they're into the United States. But they knew how to game this system because of some of the WhatsApp groups and stuff that they're part of that are where migrants tell each other, hey, this is where to go and this is what to do. So rather than go in as a married couple, they went in as two single people and signed up twice and got twice as much money. So they came out of there with about $1,200 a month for 2 years that they could use to live on. Then they got on a bus and went to Miami and signed up for a similar program in Florida. Again, two different people. So within a month of arriving in the United States, they were making $3,200 a month in stipends and benefits from the federal government and two different state governments that were supposed to be to help them get their feet under them, that would have gone away once they got jobs. But instead, they went and got jobs under the table that they didn't report. And so I actually visited them maybe 6 months later in Miami, and they were making $60,000 a year between what they made working and the stipends that they were still receiving. They had 2 cars, they had a house, and they had had a baby by then that was an American citizen. They then were sending money back to their friends and family in Cuba to finance the next round of illegal migration coming to the United States. And in this way, the U.S. taxpayer is in large part functioning as the smuggler because we're paying people to come north. And we're paying for that next wave of migration. And I want to end by telling you one more way that taxpayer treasure is being used to assist the migrants in their journey north. You probably know that the United States funds the vast majority of the United Nations, and as a part of the United Nations, there is the Organization for Immigration and Migration. This is, again, listen to the wording here. It's the Organization for Immigration and Migration. That's to assist with immigration and migration. We're funding that. And what we've seen as Todd and I have traveled around again, all over Latin America, is that in many places, these people would be stuck, but for the fact that they can go to a center, they can go to an office in Cucuta, Colombia, in Tapachula, Mexico, in various places along the route, and they can register with the Organization for Immigration and Migration and can receive a check, or in the form of a debit card. They can receive a Visa debit card that they can then use to fund the next leg of their journey to survive as they go along. And this is happening all along the route, all the way up to the U.S. southern border. And we've seen it ourselves in many places. So with that, I'll end and we can go on.